you may unmute and talk.
Bam, firework. Thank you so much.
I did speed it up a little too much. I'm sorry. I could have spoken more quickly if you'd liked, but the reality is, of course, that we do have so much to cover, and I tell you what. I'll just get into my self-driving car now. In the future, you will be doing your video calls while you're in a self-driving car. So.
And then you can all revisit the recording of the talk, and watch it very slowly. Questions? Unmute yourself.
So Frederick here. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah? Yes, you're the invisible one who's camping while the rest of us are all locked up because of a virus. But go ahead, Mr. Camper.
Yeah, I'm in Czech Republic. You know, they were very firm, very fast. So we're all good here. Anyhow,
okay.
My question is about the dark side of electrical vehicles and the batteries. So I think it's twofold. People say that an environmental cost of actually producing the batteries is not factored in, and it's huge. And the second thing is around the
So I'll point you to a study by the Union of Concerned Scientists. You'll have to Google it. I don't have the URL to spew out of my brain, but where they did a lot of analysis of this and concluded that that's not probably true. But nonetheless, there are people who argue back and forth on that. However, I have a sort of a broad optimism that because of the amount of money that's involved in this, we're already seeing a lot of, now admittedly in the laboratory, not in huge gigafactories, new battery chemistries that have fewer of the minerals which cause people to be concerned. So I'm reasonably optimistic about that being solved.
Because I remember when the Prius first came out, I think they said that's the most environmentally friendly car at the time. But if you take in the production cost of the Prius, it was still 7 years.
No. So that was FUD. That was total FUD. That was put by people who didn't like the Prius. The reason they said that was they were trying to calculate for each car how long it took to, in terms of the gasoline you burned compared to the energy you put into making the vehicle. And the trick was that the Prius used much less gasoline, so it was more years of Prius gasoline to make up for what you did than it was for Hummer. Hummer, you know, it burned that much gasoline in a year. So that one was FUD. But also, even if it weren't FUD, you do understand that at the beginning of these technologies, it's not the final form. And, you know, you don't want to be the kind of person who looks at, when I bought my first computer hard drive in 1981 or 82, and it was 10 megabytes and it cost $3,000. If I had made conclusions about the future of data storage based on that, I would have been a very wrong person. I don't know if I've been an idiot. Yeah.
One more quick question on that. I don't want to hijack, but some people say that electric cars is just a fad. It's a passing phase, and there'll be new energy sources being developed that will take another maybe 10 years before they are commercially viable. Any truth to that?
Well, no, they're certainly not a passing fad, but I mean, that doesn't mean there won't be better technologies, but energy sources, and electric cars have nothing to do with the sourcing of energy. So I'm not sure what they mean by that.
Energy. Yeah.
Frederick,
well, I mean, there are two main ways you can power cars today. You can power them with electricity, or you can power them by burning something. And you can power them by converting hydrogen into electricity by using fuel cells, but that's basically an electric car. So those are the main things. There is no other significant one on the horizon. There have been a few experiments with compressed air-powered cars and a few other things, but they're not considered that significant right now.
Maybe I can also jump into that, Frederick and Brad, because I've done these calculations in the book about the energy and CO2 footprint of electric batteries versus a combustion engine car. And I mean, the criticism that always comes from is about how much energy do we put into these raw materials? Do we have enough raw materials? But we never look at the whole cycle from well to wheel for combustion engine cars. In total, actually, the production of an electric vehicle, depending on the battery, may have more CO2 footprint, but after already 20,000, 50,000 kilometers of driving that car, it's always better at this point. What we also forget is that fuels, combustion engine fuels, gasoline, diesel, is not just falling off from sky. You need to put a lot of energy into that in order to produce that. In fact, 2.8 times more than for electricity. So that's the other thing. And the other question about fuel cell cars, there are so many problems and solutions that you need for that that's far away. It's like next 10, 15 years, there's no fuel cell car in private cars.
I'm not optimistic for hydrogen for ground transportation. I think hydrogen might have some possible merits in aviation, but where weight is the central question. However, anyway, no, I think people have, there were a lot of more doubts in the past, but these were doubts by people who didn't listen to the talk you heard from Catherine 2 weeks ago, or the talks that I do about understanding how exponential trends work. Elon Musk is the master at betting his farm on exponential trends and winning. No one has been better in the world at him, because when he started doing electric cars, everyone said, you're crazy, look what batteries cost. And what he realized was that if he worked at it, he could make batteries cost less every year, and they now cost a quarter of what they cost when he began. And suddenly, wow, it's all great. And that trend is not over. So how about a question on self-driving, though? I bet we have one.
Not self-driving, Brad, but I would have a question around, based on what you described, I think technology is accessible to most of the operators, including the OEM. People have, as you say, certainly the different ability, either the car with a computer or computer with wheels, that basically is related to the nature of their industry. But technology is accessible. They have the resources to invest in what's there. So what is really the what do you see as the predominant or the dominant mindset that exists in the different, I would say, the different categories between the one that have the car with a computer in mind and the one that have a computer with wheels? Is there what have you observed in prevailing mindset?
Yeah, it's the blessing and curse that the car makers know what a car is. Right? They know very, very well what a car is. They know very well how to build it, and that is a blessing because they can make great cars and they have made a lot of money doing that. But it's a curse because they don't see the other ways that people see what a car is. And Tesla is just the first taste of that. And Tesla does things that all the other car companies said, that's crazy. I mean, it's not that they wouldn't have known that the car companies couldn't have figured out how to make better electric motors, make better battery cooling systems, all the technological achievements that Tesla did. It's that there were too many people inside what we call the immune system of a large company. So a large company has antibodies inside it, the thing that we need to kill the coronavirus and we don't have. Large companies are full of that. The antibodies attack any foreign invader into the company, which means foreign ideas. And so when the CEO, like a board-appointed CEO of a 100-year-old company, gets up and says, like Dr. Zed, he at Daimler, and he said, yeah, we're all about mobility and autonomous and everything else. And he was like totally saying the right things. But immediately everyone in the company starts saying, oh my God, what's that going to mean for my division? Is that going to shrink my division? Am I become less important in the company? I have to work to kill this. And this happens again and again in companies. When you have board-appointed CEOs, the only large companies who actually succeed are the ones that are younger and have founder CEOs. Because when a man like Bill Gates gets up and says, hey, Microsoft, we've been ignoring the internet. Everyone drop what you're doing and put the internet into everything we do at Microsoft. The people obey him, not because he's the CEO. They obey him because he's Bill Gates. He's the man who brought them where they were. They obey Larry Page. They obey, Mark Zuckerberg. They don't obey the board-appointed CEO in the same way, even though technically that person has the same authority. So they have to somehow find a way to flush out the old thinking. Both General Motors and Ford actually came to understand this, and they deliberately put their self-driving efforts into independent startup subsidiaries rather than inside their company, so that those companies, while accessing the resources and talent of the big OEM, were able to do it. Now, I met the teams at Mercedes and at BMW that they put on these, and I didn't meet the whole teams, but I learned that they had thousands of engineers working on this problem. And I said, I was on the Google team. We had 17 people, okay, and did much better. That's the Silicon Valley thinking. Those thousands of engineers, they know too much about how they used to do their job. And the 17 people I worked with, I'm trying to remember if anyone, maybe one person was from the auto industry, but by and large, people weren't. And they were there to try and solve problems in new ways, and they did a better job. This is the curse that it is very hard, but not impossible, as I say, some car OEMs, not everyone heard the term OEM, apologize for that, but some of them will survive this, but some will not.
I would like to know a little bit more what you're thinking about level 5. When would it be realistic?
Yeah, so there is no level 5. In fact, I'm loudly on record of saying the levels were a very stupid idea that were created by government officials. They're not something engineers ever would have originally thought of, although the automotive engineers did endorse them. So, but when they created what they added this level 5, this drive everywhere, I view that as just a science fiction goal. It's never going to happen. I shouldn't say never, but it's quite some time before it happens. It's there to remind you that the actual problem here is not to make a vehicle that drives everywhere. The actual problem is to make a vehicle which drives in a useful and commercially profitable network of streets. And so you do not need a car that can drive up the gravel road to the radio tower that needs to be driven once a year to replace the parts on the radio tower. You don't need to do that. There's no commercial reason for anyone to put the effort into making a car that can do that autonomously, because you need a repair guy to get up there anyway. So you say, oh, is it profitable to have a taxi service that goes all around London? Of course it is. So you build one that goes all around London, and you don't build one that can go everywhere.
So Martin, what do you call level 5, please, just for the candy?
I'll explain what he meant. Back in the very earliest days, the government regulators in the United States wanted to, define a taxonomy, and so they set levels, and the levels were how involved the human was in operating the vehicle. Now, I've made a joke about this. I say this is like 100 years ago when Carl Benz made the first motorwagen, that the regulators decided, let's set the levels of how involved the horse is in this new vehicle. And that's not just a joke, because they used to call it the horseless carriage. They defined it in terms of the horse. And so these levels are, again, defining the car of the future, or the vehicle of the future, in terms of the driver, which is silly. So the levels were what the driver did. And level 2 is this Tesla autopilot. The driver is just watching, but has to be ready to grab the wheel at any time. And level 4 is the driver doesn't have to do anything, but it can't go everywhere. And level 5 is it can go absolutely everywhere that a human being could go. Caroline.
What will be the place of the design? Because it's one of the most important criteria for purchasing, at least in France. But what you show us is quite the same type of car. So I haven't heard about the place of the design in this new industry. I mean.
It's both exciting and scary, because yes, you have the opportunity to completely redesign the vehicle. And the company I mentioned, Zoox, which was a bit of an Icarus and went too far. This company, their focus was it was founded by a designer, not an engineer, who wanted to apply design to the vehicle of the future. And he and I both use the same vocabulary. This is not a car. This is the thing that comes after the car. So we don't know what word to apply to it. But that's what he wanted to do. He was very keen on making up these designs, and you can see some of his designs, and you can see other people's designs for what the vehicles might run. The thing that's scary to people is the design is probably very simple on the inside. And the reason is that most people, when they're in, I don't have it with me, but I'll have to simulate it. Most people, when they're going to be inside, what they're going to do is they're going to spend the time doing this. Mm-hmm. Because if you look on any subway, in the back of any Uber, and any bus, that's what everyone is doing. They're not going to want it to be some kind of fancy, cool environment. They're just going to want to use their phone like they do today while they're getting from place to place, and maybe throw up the video they're watching onto a bigger screen. That will be the extent of it. From exterior design standpoint, there's going to be a lot of interesting designs forward. And when the vehicles don't go very fast, if you have a vehicle that's constrained to city speeds, you no longer are forced into the only design that works on the highway, which is required by aerodynamics. I mean, basically, as you've probably noticed, the shape of all cars for the highway today is the same, because aerodynamics pretty much demands certain constraints about how you design the outside. I mean, you've got some liberty, but now, the other thing that people will, there are whole conferences about this, and automotive interior design and everything else, and I tell them, look inside, and I don't know why, but I was going to, something odd happened to my slide deck today, and some images were missing from it. I wanted to show you the inside of that Google prototype, and the reason is there's nothing in it at all. It has no dashboard. this scares car companies to death because the dashboard's where they make all the money these days. And they try things they put in the dashboard, they sell you as options. And that car has no pedals, no wheel, and no dashboard. It's just a very comfy, nice seat where you're expected to sit and pull out your own device and maybe throw things on the screen. By the way, Google, of course, makes the screen you have in your hand, which is why they will think that way. Apple and Google make it.
Can I ask again, when do you think that cars can go alone in a normal traffic situation?
Yeah, well, as I said, the cars that Waymo is running in Phoenix are doing that now. And all of the cars that are out there from the leading companies are now at the level where they do that, but they're not quite perfect yet. And so they have human beings in them to take the wheel if something were to happen that needs human intervention. And so they have not published the number, but for Waymo, which is the Google car, this is probably happening in ordinary city driving about every 200,000 miles, which is about a human lifetime of driving, or half a human lifetime of driving. Do they need to actually take the wheel to prevent an accident? But that's not good enough. You actually have to do better than that, which is what they're working on. Others are having the need for an intervention. The young companies need to do it every few thousand miles, and the more mature companies are slowly itching their way up to get it to be a larger number. And everybody would like to get to probably about every 500,000 miles, which is a full human lifetime of driving before you need an intervention. So you could say they already do it. There's many people who run around insisting their Tesla does it because they only have to intervene with it every few hours. But every few hours is not nearly enough, but it seems pretty impressive if you've never seen anything else.
Brad.
Yes, Marcus.
Brad, I'm fascinated because we've been focusing at the moment on cars, on the assumption that it's a person sitting there and we're replacing the driver. But what we're talking here is, because at the moment, cars, even to buy a Tesla, you've got to have a driving license, which seems crazy. And that means you've got to be able to have good eyesight and good reflexes and all the rest of the shit, and of a certain age profile. What we're talking, the direction of travel here is going to affect all the legislators, isn't it?
Yes, well, in fact, one of the big pushes, in fact, I don't have time to really show you this this video, but the very first demonstration that we did at Google was this particular video here, which I played a small role in making. And this gentleman was allowed to ride around in the vehicle without driving it. This is the earliest prototype. I don't know if you're hearing the audio on this.
Not hearing the audio.
No hands.
Do you hear it now?
Anywhere. No hands, no feet. No hands, no feet, no nothing. We're here at the stop sign. Yep.
Well, I'm going to skip ahead because I don't want
laser to check and make sure there's nothing coming either way. That's why myself looking. The end of the parking.
Okay, here we go. And so the car. Now this was made in 2011. This is ancient history for us now. Oh no, sorry. We're just doing the drive-through. He's going to pull in. There we go. We get the big reveal, which I've kind of spoiled for you.
95% of my vision is gone. I'm well past legally blind.
Right.
So we wanted to make the emphasis that, in fact, it would be possible that this man was a head of the local blind center, that yes, you're not going to need to see in order to ride in a car. And that's the eventual goal. We aren't at that level yet today, but someday we will be. This is not just actually, though, for the blind. It's possible once you're building custom vehicles. There's a very nice little Hungarian prototype that I really like. It didn't get very popular, but it's basically a hollow little car that you can wheel a wheelchair in the back and just get in and off you go. And like compared to anything else that you have to get in and out of with a wheelchair, it's amazing. So we're going to see access to a whole bunch of people who don't have access to easy mobility today, and they're very eager to make that happen.
Thank you.
As you might have experienced, we're still waiting for Eric to show up, so that's why I'm thankful, Fred, that you don't like red flags. I need to go. I just pinged.
Who's Eric? I don't know.
Eric back from Lucid Motors.
Oh, well, they just did a nice announcement the other day.
You should be there already, and I don't get response.
Any other questions?
Yeah, Brad, as long as we're waiting, I'll ask a different question. Not quite sure how to phrase it or even what I'm really getting at, but as you heard in the intros, a number of us are working on a leadership program for PSA. Your earlier comments about the mindset are very relevant. But one of the themes that the PSA CEO, Carlos Tavares, is pushing now is all about being more customer-centric. And of course, there's a big theme in almost every corporation these days. But what I'm taking away from this presentation, and thank you for it, is it's actually not about the companies tuning in more to what the customers say they want right now, because the customers may not even know what they want. It's actually other companies that are driving the evolution of mobility. And that's a very different sort of game to play in a certain way. Can you just riff on that?
Sure. I mean, actually, all of the high-tech companies and all the teams that I know of have fairly extensive user experience teams which are doing as much as they can to learn about what they think customers will do and what they will want. Now, it is very difficult because it's kind of like doing a survey of people in 2005. What are you going to do with your iPhone? And the iPhone didn't come out to 2007, for those who don't remember. Obviously, they didn't really have, in fact, industry experts didn't even have an understanding of what the iPhone would mean when it came out. So it does require vision in not just, there's an old saw in the auto industry that Henry Ford supposedly claimed if he'd listened to his customers, he would have built faster horses. I don't know if Henry Ford actually thought that, but it's not too far off. Now, PSA is not one of the leaders in this space, as I'm sure they know, and even Renault, which decided to do nothing because they would do the partnership with Nissan, and Nissan did build a lab. Actually, a friend of mine built the lab for Renault Nissan. Actually, I have a strange record in advising car companies. The two car CEOs that I've worked with are Carlos Ghosn of Nissan Renault and Rupert Stadler of Audi, and they're both in jail. Or at least they're trying to be, or people are trying to put them in jail. So, in fact, I had the fun experience when I was, Rupert used to hold this dinner every year, and I would go to it I can't remember if he did it in München or wherever it was. So we were in Europe about to go to it. We got a call from him because he'd been arrested. They said, no, we're not going to have the dinner. He's been arrested. And I said, when I was younger, I used to go to parties and then the police would show up to end the party. It hadn't happened to me in a while that the police canceled the party I was going to. So anyway, yes, German car CEOs are not hauled off in handcuffs too often, I would hope. Anyway, I better not, no other CEO should hire me because they'll probably end up in jail is all I'm saying. But anyway, PSA, PSA is definitely one of the companies that seems to have taken the approach of we're going to buy a solution from someone else who builds it. But that's not entirely a wrong strategy. I mean, the major tier ones like Bosch and Aptiv and others are all building solutions with the hope that they're going to sell them to these companies. What it means is that they won't own the technology. Most of the other companies have made the declaration that it is very important that they own the core parts of this technology and control it themselves. And in particular, they want to everyone wants to own the customer. So right now they're a little scared. Like in the ride business, Uber owns the customer. There's those million Uber drivers who actually do the work and own the cars, but the customer is owned by Uber. And if it's just Uber, using Peugeot cars in an Uber service, that's not a very happy thing for Peugeot. If it's just Waymo or Google getting a large manufacturer to manufacture up, like they have Fiat Chrysler makes their cars for them. So they get these minivans from Fiat Chrysler, they modify them at another factory with putting their sensors on them. And that's the entire FCA plan for self-driving. They think they're pretty cool because they had the only partnership with Waymo. Now Volvo has a partnership with Waymo too. But the partnership was really a purchase order. They were really being a contract manufacturer. And, Mercedes actually made this statement. It's actually kind of funny because I've said the very same thing, but I don't think they got it from me. This is, we don't want to be the Foxconn. Now, for those of you who are not in the computer industry, you may not know that Foxconn is the company in China that makes all of Apple's products. Your iPhones are made by Foxconn. Foxconn is a very successful Chinese company with a profit margin of 3%. And Apple makes most of the money from the iPhone, immense amounts of money. And that's because Apple owns the customer. Apple controls who's in the supply chain, who makes what, who makes what. So the car companies have been used to being in control, right? They, yes, they're not the dealer. They're not the dealer. Tesla's the only one that sells their cars directly, but they have been in control of the supply chain. They've told the suppliers what to do. They've designed and built the car, and they've had the brand that the customer knew. And their nameplate was actually the most valuable thing on the car. If you summed up like what customers wanted from a car, and the nameplate turned out to be the thing which drove the car purchase more than any other feature in the car. And they loved that world. But in the world of Uber, you don't care whether the Uber that shows up is a Mercedes or a Lexus, right? Who cares? I'm only going to be in it for 5 minutes. So brand, totally unimportant in a world of taxis, in the way that unless you can own the taxi brand, unless you're saying, I want a luxury taxi, so it's going to be a BMW. Right? And maybe they can push their brand into that space, and some of them are hoping to do so. So it's very challenging days ahead, because they've got to move into this new world. And the truth is, every time the world shifts like this, a lot of the incumbents do not figure it out. And it's not because there are not people inside the company who know the truth. And then not because there are not people inside the company who are excellent engineers who can build the technology, right? It's this higher level factor which makes the failure happen.
And Brad, would you say that FCA get into that partnership initially with Waymo in order to, or whatever you mentioned, in order to try to benefit from a certain transfer of, I would say, mindset and understand how things work, in order to buy some time and prepare themselves for what will be the second round of the, I would say, self-driving car, autonomous car?
I really don't have much view to their internal mindset, so I can only guess from the outside. And say, A, that they, of the 4 American car makers now, because Tesla is now the number 1 American car maker by some metrics, they were definitely in last place. And they were also definitely in last place when it came to how far along they'd gotten on self-driving. So I think they need to do something. And until an announcement last week, if you'd told me that FCA and Waymo had a partnership, I would have said, yeah, I wouldn't call it a partnership. I'd call it a purchase order. Right? It's not a... There was very little collaboration going on. So recently, Waymo did announce that they have an exclusive relationship with FCA for light trucks, delivery vans, that sort of thing. They're going to do that. But I don't even know, is it exclusive for a year? Is it exclusive for 2 years? I still haven't seen signs of them having any leadership in this relationship. I think that Waymo could switch to someone else in a very short amount of time. I mean, it wouldn't be free to do that, but it would be comparatively, if they were unsatisfied with the situation, they could change very quickly, which is not the situation I'd like to be in. They're really being the Foxconn. But on the other hand, Hyundai said, we're happy to be the Foxconn. Was it Kia or Hyundai? I can't remember which one. One of the Korean companies said this. And so some companies may feel that they're ready for a high-tech giant to lead the way, and for them just to be a successful supplier in that supply chain. But most of them don't want to be that.
Maybe I have another question if no one has something. From your vast experience, Brad, or even Mario, there is quite a likely scenario you describe around a company like PSA just going to acquire a technology or a company in order to basically have some inroad into what the future look like. Have you seen, I would say, such attempt in the past, and in the industry, and especially failures, and what makes this attempt being a failure, or of course any success that you may have seen?
Several of the companies have done exactly that. So General Motors was very behind, and they acquired Cruise, a fairly young startup. Ford semi-acquired this company called Argo. Aptiv, which was part of, damn it, now there's my brain gone. Mario, which tier 1 was Aptiv before? It was, No, you're muted, but.
So you're talking about which company acquired the other?
No, Aptiv was the renaming of a part of major tier one. And
no. They're
okay,
partnering
well,
with
anyway,
Lyft, but I do not know who was Aptiv.
No, but Aptiv bought a company called Nutonomy, which was founded between a Singapore team and a MIT team. And so they now have their offering. So this is a common strategy. And Zoox, as I mentioned, was acquired by Amazon, but it was bid on by General Motors Cruise unit. And there may have been other bidders as well. So the number of really top teams to buy is modest. There's an interesting... Delphi. It was Delphi, which was Aptiv, which spun off from. Yes, exactly. Yeah. Thank you. There's most of the startups are not nearly as well funded as Zoox. So there's another company called Aurora, and Aurora was interestingly founded by the guy who had been the lead of the Google team. I worked for him. Now the Waymo team, and he led that for most of his existence, and he decided to leave and found his own startup, and immediately got a $2 billion valuation, which is better than a kick in the head. And what they did, though, which got them that valuation, was everybody knows that Google is way ahead of everybody, and because of that, everybody would like to somehow be involved with that on their own terms. Unfortunately, they don't want to be involved on Google's terms. Google is not the kind of company car companies are used to negotiating with. Right? Usually when you're a car company and you go into the room to negotiate with a tier one, you say jump and they say how high, right? There's no Bosch inside written on your car with there's no ego in a car supplier. Only the stereo makers are the only ones who get their brands printed on the inside of a car. So that's what they're used to doing, but Google is used to being the most famous company in the world. And so when Google is used to being in charge of the room, and so when the two get together, and I was in some of these meetings, it's very clear that both people think they're the one in charge, and so nothing happens, except as we see, like this purchase order of Chrysler minivans. So because you couldn't get a deal with Waymo, everybody said, oh, here's the guy who built Waymo, and now he will license his technology. And so they got a lot of initial early partnerships, including Volkswagen and some others. Now, Volkswagen actually pulled out. So there's some dissatisfaction with that, but this is what's been going on. So companies that you can buy, today you'd have to buy a smaller company. Now, Cruise was very small when GM bought them, but you'd be later to the game. And until about last year, everybody thought there was a super duper rush. And so you would spend any amount of money to speed up your work. I don't know if people have that philosophy quite as much, both because of a bit of a slowing down in self-driving cars, combined at the same time with our friend COVID-19, which has slowed everybody down.
Thanks, Brad.
Brad, Brad, I was going to ask another question about timing. And I take your earlier point, nobody can predict with certainty. My question is more, is there going to be a gradual evolution of all of this, or are we going to reach a point, a tipping point where all of a sudden things begin to change radically very, very fast, and the OEMs that just aren't prepared are going to find themselves in deep trouble, very, very quickly?
Yeah, I'm going to call up a little graphic with the answer to your question. Let's see if I can do that. But so the answer is yes and no. The way that the answer is yes, and let me see if I can full screen this and bring it up for you. I don't know how well can you read that, or is that a little too?
Yeah, now we can see it.
So this is a newspaper clipping from 1928, and it is about how the horse and buggy industry in the course of 2 years went from 500 companies to 200, and from down to 1/3 of its output in just 2 years. In the 1920s, this is what the car industry did to its predecessor. And as we know, the pace of change today is much slower than the 1920s, right?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, well, no. you know, and compare that to today's thinking, right? Where, oh, sorry, I'm picking up the wrong thing here, but you know, this is there's the iPhone announced in 2007. 5 years later, who doesn't have something like it in their pocket? That's the pace of change today. There's the car industry. That's an electric car ad from a century ago. That shows you how fast the car industry has taken to give us electric cars, because they did actually have them along the, in fact, some of the first cars were electric. So that's the, yes, it definitely can happen. I mean, if the car industry pushed its own predecessor off a cliff in 2 years, it can definitely happen to the car industry. On the other hand, there is an immense amount of money required to do that. So what I believe is actually going to happen is very fast adoption, but city by city. And what that means is that some company like Waymo or Cruise or Zoox or any other company that's a lead player is going to get their service ready. They're going to deploy it in, they're going to pick their first city to deploy it. And that's going to be the city they find most attractive for a lot of different reasons. And unfortunately, it's not like selling the Tesla where you can sell Teslas, so you can drive them in every town. It's only drive where you've tested them and certified them to drive. So you can't do every city at once. Nobody, not even Google, has enough money to do all the cities at once because it's an expensive process. So what you'll see is sort of a land rush where all the different players are all trying to grab cities and get as much market share in that city as they can, so they can be the leader. Now, that may not be the path to victory, but it's certainly the safe plan. Everybody would certainly like to be the first mover leader. And so that means that in 2035, there'll still be cities where it's not really very common yet. But there'll be other places where it's all taken over. By the way, it also will say that there's going to be people who you can take their bent steering wheel from their cold, dead hands. They're not going to switch to this. And the people in the countryside are not going to have taxi service coming to their door in 2 minutes for a long time to come. So that's a third of the population right there. So there's other things that will slow down, and it's not actually going to be as fast as the horse and buggy thing. The horse and buggy thing just tells you how quickly it can happen in the places that it will. Yeah, longer versions of the talk, I do answer that question, as you can see.
There was a question from Frederick on the chat box around the integration of battery and so forth, the production, battery production.
If you could comment on that, please.
Yeah, so let me see if I can find it again. I had it, oh, there we go. So this is actually what Tesla's first secret was. In fact, Elon gave me a tour of the very earliest Tesla factory, and the whole factory was just a place where they stuffed batteries into battery cooling boxes, which they had created. And the chassis of the original Tesla was a Lotus that was made by Lotus in Britain. And all they did was this battery integration. That was all of Tesla. And then later, their later models, they made more of the vehicle. So it's very essential to have a good grasp on the batteries. Now, are they actually doing battery production? Well, that was something Tesla did later in their life. They decided that if batteries are going to be the key part of our vehicle, we should make them. And they built some very large factories so they can be one of the world's largest battery producers. Right now, the rest of the big battery production is in Asia. And most people are just buying from those Asian sources. I don't know, Mario, if you've tracked if any of the car OEMs are trying to build battery factories themselves.
In Germany, I think they want to add some, but it's very slow, always in partnership with Korean or Asian car manufacturers, battery manufacturers. It's not that.
I mean, the number one country for electric vehicles right now is China. Right? I mean, it's the number one country for vehicles. China makes more cars than I think the rest of the world combined now. But in China, the electric vehicles are huge, and there's lots of small electric vehicles, scooters, mini cars, that sort of thing, that you don't see outside of China.
Yeah, but I know the Swedish company Northvolt, they're building a huge factory in northern Sweden, and they just signed a joint venture with Volkswagen to build a factory in, what is it, Wolfshaven, they reside, isn't it?
I don't know, with BMW, I think a 2 billion with BMW, Northvolt, and BMW, I think was the...
Yeah, okay.
If I remember correctly. Yeah.
I think it's Volkswagen, but yeah.
Yeah, okay. No, I haven't been tracking that factory, but so batteries are certainly very important. I mean, Tesla's initial instinct on that was correct. You know, the batteries are very much part of what you have to be exceptional in order to be a winner.
And one question, Brad and Mario, you were talking about in relation to the battery of certainly a center of gravity, which is more around Asia. But when it comes to this new perspective around autonomous cars, self-driving car, and so forth. What is the contribution of I would say of some country like India or like China that have, I would say, also plenty of, I would say, financial resources, engineer and a lot of talents. It seems a little bit I would say not as active as it could be.
Actually, it's partly that we just don't get as much news out of China as we do out of other places. There is a lot of stuff going on in China. The Chinese are not generally viewed as leaders. The Silicon Valley companies are still viewed as the leaders. But the Chinese obviously have the ability to change regulations at the swipe of a pen when the mindset approaches it. They were actually slow to allow testing in China, though, compared to the United States. Well, testing began in the United States with no regulatory change. People basically said, we looked at the law and it doesn't say no robots, so therefore we're putting out robots, because nobody thought to say no robots. And slowly then regulations have been written. In fact, we got some, the first law was put in the state of Nevada just to make sure that it was legal to do the testing. Arizona is where a lot of people are doing testing because it's got a very simple and liberal regulatory regime around it. Europeans, I'm afraid, are, well, Europeans love regulation. That's all I can say. And the European auto industry is a little more hidebound by that. And also the road management is a little more hidebound by that. And it's going to slow down European deployment and European development. And you do not see really top projects going on mostly in Europe. The British project I showed you, Oxbotica, it's actually put itself up for sale recently. It was founded by an Oxford professor, actually. But they have all, like Zoox, they have, I think, decided they'd rather be bought than try and continue that fight. So I think Silicon Valley will continue to win. And now Silicon Valley, which is the place you're studying, has many secret ingredients which have given it a success. I'll tell you, the one I think is actually the most important, which I first discovered back in the 90s when I was at a conference of Silicon Valley founders. And they asked us, if you were born outside the United States, please stand up. And more than half of the people in the room, we stood up. So they didn't ask this question. Later, I've asked this question. If you were, I've made myself very small, haven't I? If you were born outside Silicon Valley, please stand up, and the rest of the room will stand up. So Silicon Valley's magic ingredient is that no one is from Silicon Valley. And everyone goes through the, I just recently got a new visa to live in the United States. The new president the Americans have elected is unfriendly to immigrants, and so he's made it harder for me to be here. And everyone has to go through that. And they're hungry and they want to do something big, and they come to this place, which is the world capital of technology. In the same way they went to Paris a century ago, and the same way they went to other places in New York and other places at different times. This is the place they come to. So sometimes I'm asked, hey, how could we have the Silicon Valley of France? And I say, well, no problem. You could have it, just not with French people. And of course, they get offended by that statement. Especially politicians, because their job is to make jobs for the French. And I say, California didn't do it with Californians. Are you that much smarter than they are in California that you think you can do it with your own people? Of course you can't. They didn't. You can't either. But unfortunately, Europe, like the United States, is getting more afraid of immigrants, not less. And I think that will curse it. And I don't know how to stop it. I mean, it bothered me. One of the things I love most about driving in Europe in recent times is going across the borders and seeing the border stations with the boards on the windows, right? And just a reminder of what it was. And of course, now I've taken trains in Europe and they've come on to check my passport, make sure I'm not Syrian. Well, you laugh, but I mean, how many, haven't you all had this happen? No. Yeah. I had to show my passport going between Malmo and Copenhagen. I mean, that's nuts. So that's what Europe has to fix, unfortunately, if it wants to lead the world again.
Brad, thank you so much for this session. Thank you for the extended 30 minutes. A lot of seeds of curiosity spreads in the minds. I really enjoyed this. Thank you again. Thank you.
Yeah, it's good to meet all of you too. And I'll tell you what, if you prefer to see here you go. Now I have a bookshelf behind me, which is the normal thing you're supposed to have. This is my actual bookshelf in my office, one of them. So then I can. In fact, a lot of people don't realize that this is semi-fake. I mean, it's real, but it's in the room next. It's over there in that room. Anyway, so great to meet all of you, and perhaps you'll want to do more at some point later, and you can certainly talk to me.
And I'll connect you all.
My email address.
Exactly, and we can take
yes
it there.
Back to my other conference, and then maybe to a conference in New Zealand. That's the one advantage of COVID, is that you can in one day be in a lot of different continents at once.
That's true.
All right.
Thank you
you,
so
Brad.
much.
Bye bye.
Have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.